Just went into a courtyard, sat down with them. There was all this kind of incense and stuff floating around.
When I was a kid, I strutted around the stage looking like a rooster. It was kind of ridiculous, really. But at the time, it felt okay. It was obvious, yes, but everyone else seemed to join in, so I just became another cliché of Led Zeppelin, bare chest, singing things like, "Oh baby, baby, squeeze my lemon," and all that. Looking back, it's strange because Led Zeppelin wasn't a heavy band in the way people think. It was actually a very delicate and dynamic arrangement of individuals, but the image of the band was copied and misunderstood by so many others. I was celebrated back then, and I didn't even realize it. Once you have that reputation, people expect you to stay frozen in it, even if you've changed. Every time I stepped on stage with a band, I was instantly labeled the old rock hero. Still, despite how chaotic it could be, we had strong quality control. So many ideas were tossed around that could have failed miserably, but we knew when to stop and when to take a break. Sometimes that meant not seeing each other for months until everyone was ready again. There had to be drama, otherwise I'd just go home. And yet, even at home, there was drama, so there's no escaping it. Singing about the weather only gets you so far unless you've written that classic song. What made Zeppelin great was that it felt like a massive, unforgettable one-night stand, everything thrown in, passion, truth, chaos, and beauty. But the illusion couldn't last forever. Each of us began thinking about what came next. For me, things shifted dramatically when I lost my son. That kind of loss, the biggest, really, forces you to reevaluate everything. Who you are, your condition, your future. It was 1978 when I applied to become a teacher through the Rudolf Steiner education system. I was accepted and genuinely considered walking away from music. As amazing as my career had been, it hadn't always felt spectacular. With time, you grow tougher, but that soft underbelly never really disappears. I had no understanding of true tragedy until then. That loss changed me forever. John Bonham, our drummer, had been the one to gently pull me back into music. He wasn't manipulative, just incredibly supportive. He was my best friend a lot of the time, at least when we weren't fighting. We came from the same place in the Black Country, and we didn't mince words. Between us, a spade was always a spade. We were different from the other two in the band. When John died in 1980 at the age of 32 after a heavy drinking session, it hit me deeply. I've had nearly 40 years more life than him, and I think about what a waste it was. Losing him stripped away any remaining naivety. That was the end of the real emotional heart of Zeppelin for me. On December 4, 1980, Led Zeppelin officially announced it would disband. The bond was broken. Stepping out of Led Zeppelin's massive shadow was a daunting task. Suddenly, I was launching a solo career after being part of something that had become iconic. It was an interesting time because I felt incredibly exposed, like I'd been wrapped in this exclusive bubble for years and then it popped. It wasn't always a great place to be, but it was familiar. And then it was gone. These changes happen in life no matter what you do. I was scared, yes, but more than that, I felt vulnerable. I was only 32 when Zeppelin ended, and I remember standing there thinking, well, I guess that's that. I even joked about taking up dry stone walling or becoming a steeplejack. I was really just wobbling, unsure of what came next. Rebuilding confidence as a solo artist was both a personal and professional challenge. After the end of Led Zeppelin, I was faced with a choice: do nothing and fade away, or completely rethink everything. There was a lot of trial and error in those early days. I played small clubs around England, often under the radar, without even using my name. That anonymity allowed me to reconnect with music in a purer way and rebuild my confidence. I had to find out if I still had the nerve, the desire, the will to keep going. It was intimidating to be alone after so long with a powerful collective like Zeppelin, but it was also the right time in my life. At 32, I realized I needed to experience more than just the role I'd been playing for over a decade. I had to prove to myself that I could still sing, that I still had a voice that mattered. It would have been pointless to lock that away just because things had changed. breaking from Led Zeppelin meant entering a world I barely understood. I'd lived in that bubble for years, and starting over meant learning how to manage myself, how to navigate a very different music industry. But it was exciting too. I could make all the decisions, and all the mistakes. There were absurd moments, of course, but that was part of the journey. I was moving forward, far from where I began at 17. By the time I was 35, I felt I was somewhere entirely new. I gathered musicians and recorded my first solo album without a record deal, just to see what I was capable of, with no strings attached. That album, understandably, was emotionally and musically a hangover from Zeppelin. At that point, my input in Zeppelin had been important but limited. Now, my creative vision had to lead the way. As for why I didn't like to talk about Led Zeppelin for so long, it wasn't because I disrespected it. Quite the opposite. I needed distance. I needed to be able to say, "This is who I am now, and this is what I do," without leaning on my past to give my present any weight. But people wouldn't let go of the Zeppelin myth. I spent years pretending I had a completely new career from nowhere, denying my connection to the band. I became stubborn, convinced myself that ignoring the past was the only way to build something new. I'd get short-tempered when people brought it up, even though many told me, "Your contribution was vital. Stop pretending it wasn't." Now, after nearly a decade of that struggle, I feel I've finally created enough distance. I can play Zeppelin songs when I want to, without feeling like I'm relying on them. I'll never become one of those cabaret acts who just rehash their back catalog. I respect Led Zeppelin deeply. It was a beautiful, sensitive creature, not something to be reduced to sound bites on the radio or quick interviews on TV. I want its legacy to endure with dignity, not to be dragged around like a promotional tool for the rest of my life. So it's not that I don't want to talk about it, it's just that I want it, and myself, to be respected for what we were and are. Reclaiming artistic integrity. Looking back, I've come to realize that a musician needs both a future and a past. I understand now why so many people and bands are fascinated with legacy acts and nostalgia, even though I didn't fully grasp it at the time. Led Zeppelin was an enigma. It had its own momentum, something almost outside of us. It wasn't self-propelling so much as it just existed in a forceful, almost magical state. It worked when it worked, and it had a lifespan. The way it was presented in those days made sense, but now it's moved into a completely different space. Success, if you're not careful, breeds complacency. Too many bands find a theme that works and stick with it far too long, losing their creative edge. That's something Zeppelin avoided. Artists like Peter Gabriel walked away from the familiar at the right time and started creating fresh, challenging material. That's the key. If you stay too long, you lose vitality and become a caricature, a marionette. You're no longer the frontman, you're just performing to fulfill an expectation. That's what happens when rock devolves into formulaic patterns. 4 beats to the bar, straight to the chorus, and straight to the bank. It becomes predictable, uninspired. To me, staying relevant means avoiding the trap of doing the same thing with the same people forever. There's no joy in it if it becomes a mechanical process, just another path to the next luxury car. That's never been the point for me. No matter how many new fans or offers Jimmy and I have had thrown at us, it's meaningless unless there's real artistic purpose. Zeppelin didn't just grow musically, we helped shape a shift in live music's scale. Along with The Who and the Stones, we saw venues expand, capacities rise, and the entire touring landscape transform. It got massive, intimidating even, and everything about the performance model changed. Still, I've always resisted being lumped into that classic rock star club. Sure, I was born in the same era as many of those icons, but I don't see myself as one of them. I'm not part of that middle-of-the-road rock institution. Unlike bands like the Stones or the Beatles, we never chased the pop spotlight. Yet in the end, we became corporate fodder too, executives buying cocaine on the back of Zeppelin's success. That wasn't our intention, but it happened, and it's a reminder of how easily artistic freedom can be co-opted. So no, I don't see myself as part of that old boys rock club. I don't want to exist in that stale, self-congratulatory space. I'd rather be musically challenged. I'd rather head to Boston and find a band like the Del Fuegos, just hang around quietly and absorb their energy. That's what keeps it real, being close to the pulse of creativity, not stuck in the memory of what once was. The Zeppelin myth versus reality. There's always another article, like the one coming out next week in Rolling Stone, that keeps feeding into the myth of Led Zeppelin. This particular piece talks about the ongoing fascination with the band and the repetition in music. Everyone seems to have an opinion, except for the one guy who didn't comment. Even the guy from the cult chimed in, saying there was something truly special about Zeppelin, how important they were, and so on. But what stood out most to me was his honesty when he added that he was just glad Zeppelin wasn't reforming, because if they did, bands like his would be out of a job. That really said it all. The truth is, no one ever came close to what Led Zeppelin was. But here's the key point. Led Zeppelin doesn't exist anymore. And if there's a void in rock music now, at least the bands trying to fill it aren't pretending to be original, or claiming to replace us. They know, and we know, that the original can't be duplicated.